cold open, the floor is about to drop. Chrisean Rock is one phone call away from a homicide charge. That is not a rumor. That is not a wild internet whisper. That is not a caption somebody wrote under a blurry photo at 3 in the morning to farm engagement. That is a sentence being written right now, in real time, by real detectives, in a real precinct, about a real dead man, and the ink on the page is still wet. The pen has not left the paper. The file has not been closed. The folder has not been shelved. It is open, it is active, it is moving, and the name at the top of the witness list is a name every single person watching the screen already knows. Y'all locked in? Because tonight the floor drops out from under one of the loudest women in the entire culture, and it drops for a reason that is going to leave every single person in this comment section staring at the screen like they just watched a magic trick they cannot unsee. We diving in headfirst tonight. I'm not going to hold your hand through it. I'm not going to soften the corners. I'm not going to pretend the timeline is friendlier than it is. What I am going to do is walk you through the dominoes, one at a time, in the order they fell, and let you decide whether the pattern in front of your eyes is the pattern I think it is. Here is the sentence I want you to sit with before I say another word. The same afternoon Chrisean Rock told the internet, laughing, grinning, half-shrugging on her own live stream, that she was packing suitcases and quietly leaving the United States. Homicide detectives were already knocking on doors across Baltimore, asking her name out loud. Not Ronnie's other associates. Not the neighborhood. Not the block. Her name. Chrisean Rock. The badge in the field with her name in its mouth. Let that land. Really let it land. She said the words, moving out the country on a public stream, in front of her audience, in front of her child, in front of the internet. And within the same news cycle, same 24-hour window, badges were in the field asking her associates what they knew. That is not coincidence. That is not the universe throwing dice. That is choreography. Somebody somewhere is dancing to a rhythm the rest of us cannot hear yet, and the choreography does not favor Chrisean Rock. The choreography, in fact, is pointing at her with both hands. Now peep this, because this story doesn't start today, and it doesn't start with a suitcase. It doesn't start with a live stream. It doesn't start with a hashtag. It starts with a baby. It starts with a paternity test. It starts with a man named Ronny who, until very recently, was breathing air on this planet like the rest of us, waking up, eating breakfast, checking his phone, loving his family, arguing on the internet, and, more than anything else, trying to reach a little boy he believed was his son. Ronny was the ex-boyfriend of Chrisean Rock. Not a rumor. Not a whisper. A documented, on-camera, on-record ex-boyfriend. And when Chrisean Rock got pregnant, Ronny did not shrink into the background. Ronny did not disappear into the shadows. Ronny did what a certain kind of man does when he believes his blood is walking around in a child. Ronny stood up in front of the internet, the whole loud, screaming, screenshot happy internet, and said, out loud, in complete sentences, "The baby is mine." He did not say it once. He did not say it quietly. He said it repeatedly, on multiple platforms, in front of anyone who would listen, and he backed it up with the one thing a man in his position can back it up with, a legal filing. Chrisean Rock said the baby belongs to Blueface. Blueface, from the moment his voice touched a microphone about that child, said the baby is not mine, the baby is Ronnie's. 3 sides of a triangle. 2 of them Ronny and Blueface, pointing directly at Ronny. One of them, Chrisean Rock herself, pointing everywhere except at Ronny. And Ronny, being the man he was, did not sit at home and cry into a pillow. Ronny did not fold. Ronny did not run. Ronny walked into a courtroom and filed for a paternity test. He wanted the truth stamped by a judge. He wanted his name on a document. He wanted, and this is the part every man watching this right now should feel in his ribs, the simple confirmation that the child he had been claiming publicly was actually his. That is not a wild ask. That is not an aggressive ask. That is not an unreasonable ask. That is the smallest ask a man can make when he believes he has a son on this earth. Give me a swab. Give me a result. Give me a piece of paper. Let me know. That is where this story begins. Not with a bullet. Not with a suitcase. With a swab. With a court filing. With a father saying, in the quietest voice a man can use in a room full of lawyers, please just tell me if he's mine. Hold on to that. Because everything you're about to hear, every witness, every phone call, every live stream, every 10 shots, every 10 minutes, every packed suitcase, every homicide detective in a Baltimore stairwell, every single thing you're about to hear traces itself back, in a straight line, to that one small, ordinary, unreasonable to nobody request. Let me tell you what happened next. Act I, the triangle. Chrisean, Blueface, Ronny. To understand what happened to Ronny in the driver's seat of his own car in Baltimore, you have to understand the triangle. Because the triangle is the geometry that produced the bullet. The triangle is the shape that put a man in front of a shooter's window. And the triangle is the shape the district attorney's office is currently studying like a scripture, one side at a time. Side one of the triangle is Chrisean Rock. Everybody in the culture knows who Chrisean Rock is by now. You do not need me to run the biography. You do not need me to walk you through the come-up. You do not need me to catalog the meltdowns, the fights, the live streams, the mixtapes, the tattoos, the tears, the reconciliations, the tattoos over the tears. Chrisean Rock is one of the most documented women of her generation. Every high she has ever had is on camera. Every low she has ever had is on camera. Every relationship she has ever had is on camera. There is not a private moment in her adult life the internet has not been invited into, and most of those invitations came from her own hand. Side 2 of the triangle is Blueface. And Blueface, love him or hate him, is the man whose orbit produced Chrisean Rock the celebrity. Before Blueface, Chrisean Rock was a talented, chaotic, aspiring rapper trying to break out of a life most people would not survive. After Blueface, Chrisean Rock was a household name in every barbershop and every beauty salon in America. The Blueface-Chrisean relationship was, for years, the most watched dysfunctional relationship in the culture. Not because it was healthy. Not because it was beautiful. Because it was raw. Because it was public. Because it was violent. Because it refused to end when every rational observer said it should have ended. That relationship produced the first child. That relationship produced the reality show. That relationship produced the brand. And then, at a certain point, that relationship produced a second pregnancy. A pregnancy that Chrisean Rock announced to the world with a photograph. A pregnancy she attributed to Blueface. A pregnancy Blueface immediately, publicly, aggressively rejected. A pregnancy Blueface said, and I want you to hear the exact framing, was not his in any capacity, was not his in any window, was not his in any account, and instead belonged to another man. That other man was Ronny. Side 3 of the triangle is Ronny. And Ronny is the side of the triangle the culture never bothered to learn about while he was alive, which is one of the tragedies of this story. Ronny was a young man from Baltimore. Ronny had a family. Ronny had a mother. Ronny had a grandmother. Ronny had a life outside the frame. He was not a Blueface. He was not a Chrisean. He was not a rapper with a Wikipedia page. He was a man who, at a certain point in his young life, ended up dating one of the most famous women of his generation and paid a price for that entanglement that no man should ever pay. Ronny's relationship with Chrisean Rock is one of the parts of this story people conveniently forget. It was not a rumor. It was not a fling anybody was hiding. Chrisean Rock herself, on multiple podcasts, in multiple interviews, has confirmed that she and Ronny had a real relationship. She has used the word passionate. She has used language that indicated something real happened between them. Her own sister, and we're going to get to her sister, believe me, has said the same thing on the record. There is no world in which Ronny was a stranger. There is no world in which Ronny was a random accuser. Ronny was in her life. Ronny was in her home. Ronny was in her bed. That is the on-record starting point. So when the pregnancy hit, and Blueface rejected it, and Chrisean insisted it was Blueface, and Ronny stepped forward to claim it, the triangle was not academic. The triangle was biological. The triangle was chronological. The triangle was, in the most literal sense, a matter of dates on a calendar. And the only instrument on this earth that could settle a matter of dates on a calendar with 3 adults arguing over a baby was a paternity test. Not a live stream. Not a diss track. Not a comment section vote. A court-ordered, sealed envelope, judge-stamped paternity test. Ronny wanted that test. Blueface wanted that test. The only person in the triangle who did not want that test was the woman standing at the top of the triangle. And that right there is the first data point I need you to file away in your memory. Because the person in a paternity dispute who does not want the paternity test is telling you something. They are telling you, without saying a word, that they are afraid of the answer. Innocent parties in paternity disputes welcome the test. Guilty parties in paternity disputes bury the test. It has been that way since the day the first swab was invented, and it will be that way until the end of time. Chrisean Rock did not want the test. Now, I want to be fair here, because I owe fairness to every party in this story, including Chrisean Rock. There are legitimate reasons a woman might resist a paternity test that have nothing to do with guilt. There are custody implications. There are emotional implications. There are safety implications. A woman with a violent history in a relationship might reasonably fear what a positive test would unlock in terms of custody exposure. I am not going to pretend those reasons do not exist. I am going to acknowledge them, put them on the table, and then keep walking, because those reasons do not explain what happened next. Those reasons explain a legal filing. Those reasons explain a delay motion. Those reasons explain an attorney sending a strongly worded letter. Those reasons do not explain what happened in the driver's seat of a car in Baltimore on the night 10 shots rang out and 10 minutes passed before a single neighbor cracked a door. We'll get there. We'll get there in a minute. But before we get there, I want you to understand the shape of the triangle, because the shape of the triangle is the shape of the motive. Two men were pointing at Ronny as the biological father. One woman was pointing at Blueface. A court date was on the calendar. A test was scheduled. And a clock was ticking. The clock is the whole story. Please remember the clock. The clock is going to come back in every single act of this breakdown, because the clock is the thing the shooter was racing. Act 2. The Paternity War and the Baltimore Confrontation. Here's where the room gets warm. Chrisean Rock did not want that test to happen. That much is not opinion. That much is court record. That much is her own attorney's filings. That much is the transcript of the hearings where continuances were requested. Ronny, understanding exactly what he was up against, understanding that time was not on his side, understanding that a woman with a legal team and a public relations budget can slow walk a paternity test until the sun burns out, did not just sit at home and wait for a judge. Ronny flew. Ronny drove. Ronny showed up. There is a piece of footage that has been circulating on the internet for months now, and if you have not seen it, you need to stop this and go find it, because everything I am telling you is anchored to that footage. In that footage, Chrisean Rock has rolled into Baltimore for a public appearance. She is out in the world, in public, doing what she does, being a personality, being a brand, being a moving target for the internet. And Ronny pulls up on her. Not with a weapon. Not with a threat. Not with an entourage. He pulls up on her with his voice. He pulls up on her with 3 words, repeated 3 times, in a cadence that has been burned into the memory of everybody who has watched that clip. That's my son. That's my son. That's my son. 3 times. Like a man trying to hammer a truth into concrete. Like a father who has been screaming into the wind for months and has finally arrived, in person, in the same air as the woman he needs to hear him. That's my son. That's my son. That's my son. His voice was not calm. His voice was not measured. But his voice was also not violent. He was not threatening her. He was not raising a fist at her. He was saying a sentence. He was saying the same sentence he had been saying in court filings for months. He was saying the sentence he was going to say to a judge in 4 to 6 weeks. He was previewing his testimony in the parking lot. Chrisean Rock's response? Watch the clip. Study the clip. Because Chrisean Rock's response tells you everything you need to know about the emotional architecture of this story. She did not turn around and say the baby is not yours. She did not turn around and say leave me alone with a laugh. She did not roll her eyes. She did not smirk. She called security. She muttered a word under her breath that sounded, to everyone who has slowed the audio down, like a slur or a dismissal, Some observers heard police something, some heard something else, and the internet has been arguing about the exact syllables ever since. And she had him walked out the door. She did not deny it. She did not turn around and say the baby is not yours. She had him removed. That is a detail I want you to hold on to, because the way you react to a man who claims your child tells you everything about whether you are afraid of what a test would say. If the baby was not his, the easiest sentence in the English language would have been, "The baby is not yours." 6 words. 6 syllables. 0 preparation. A woman who knows, with absolute certainty, that the baby is not the man's does not need security to make that sentence come out of her mouth. That sentence comes out of her mouth reflexively. That sentence comes out of her mouth because it is the truth, and the truth is faster than security. Chrisean Rock did not say that sentence. Chrisean Rock chose escalation over denial. Chrisean Rock chose a security guard over a straight answer. That silence right there is the first fingerprint on the glass. That silence is going to be played in slow motion in every documentary about this case for the next 20 years. That silence in the parking lot in Baltimore is going to be Exhibit A in every retrospective about how the internet missed the biggest story of the decade until it was too late. Now, here's where the floor drops for the first time. In the next 4 to 6 weeks, and I want you to hear that phrase again, 4 to 6 weeks, because that phrase is the fuse, per the court schedule, Chrisean Rock was going to be legally compelled to take a court-ordered paternity test. 4 to 6 weeks. That was the window. That was the runway. That was the countdown clock every man, woman, and child in Baltimore who knew the case knew was ticking. And exactly 1 week before that hearing, Ronny was sitting in his car outside his own house in Baltimore. Let that land. 1 week before the hearing. Not 1 month. Not 3 weeks. 1 week. The scene, as it has been described by neighbors, was ordinary. It was quiet. It was the kind of night that does not announce itself. The engine was probably still running. The dome light was probably still on. Ronny was probably on his phone, or lighting a cigarette, or scrolling, or thinking about the son he still had not been allowed to hold. It was, by every account, an ordinary Baltimore evening on an ordinary Baltimore block. And then a second car pulled up behind him. I want you to visualize that. Not because I am trying to be lurid, but because visualization is the only way a story like this actually lands in a viewer's ribs. A second car. Not passing. Not driving through. Pulling up behind Ronny's car. Positioning itself. Aligning itself. Choosing its angle. That is not a random Baltimore stray. That is not a robbery. That is not a case of mistaken identity. That is a car that knew where Ronny was, knew what Ronny was doing, and knew when Ronny would be sitting still. A shooter got out of the second car, ran up on Ronny's window, and unloaded. 10 shots. 10. Not 2. Not 3. Not 5. 10. That is not a warning shot. That is not a message. That is not a scare. That is an execution. That is the number of rounds you empty when you are not there to talk, not there to negotiate, not there to leave the door open for a follow-up. That is the number of rounds you empty when the objective is to make absolutely sure the man in the driver's seat does not get up. And here is the part that will sit in your chest for a week. Every neighbor on that street heard it. Every neighbor on that street stayed inside. And nobody, not one soul, came outside to check on him for at least 10 minutes. 10 shots. 10 minutes. A father, bleeding out in the driver's seat of his own vehicle, 1 week before a paternity test that would have changed everything about a court case, being watched by millions of people. And there is not a single soul on that Baltimore block brave enough to walk toward the sound. That is a sentence I want you to sit inside. That is not a sentence about Ronny. That is a sentence about a neighborhood that has learned, through hard-earned trauma, that 10 shots means whoever is standing over the body is still in the area, still armed, and still willing. By the time a neighbor finally crept up to the car cautiously, quietly, probably praying, Ronny was already gone. He was shot up everywhere. There was no saving him. There was nothing left to save. The paramedics who arrived did what paramedics do. The officers who arrived did what officers do. The tape went up. The block went quiet. And somewhere across the country, in a house or a hotel or a green room, a woman's phone buzzed with a piece of news that removed a court date from her calendar forever. That is the kind of ambush that requires knowledge. That is the kind of ambush that requires timing. That is not a random Baltimore stray. That is a mission. Whoever pulled up behind Ronny knew where he was, knew when he would be sitting still, and knew he would be alone. That is not a coincidence hit. That is an appointment. Now, when a story like that hits the timeline, the first question anybody with a brain asks is, who benefited? Who woke up the next morning with a lighter calendar? Who lost a courtroom obligation the second Ronny's chest stopped moving? Who, in the entire universe of people connected to this young man, gained something material legally, financially, reputationally from Ronny no longer being able to walk into a Baltimore courthouse and hand a bailiff a piece of paper? And the honest, unavoidable, unpleasant answer to that question is the same woman who is now, allegedly, packing bags and telling the world she's leaving the country. That is not a headline I invented. That is not a hot take. That is not a rage bait framing designed to farm your outrage. That is a straight line of dominoes anyone with two eyes can trace. The court hearing evaporated the moment Ronny evaporated. The paternity test evaporated the moment Ronny evaporated. The legal exposure evaporated the moment Ronny evaporated. The public embarrassment of a positive result evaporated. The custody threat of a positive result evaporated. The narrative collapse of a positive result evaporated. Every single one of those threats to Chrisean Rock's public story evaporated on the same Baltimore night, in the same 15-second interval, when a shooter emptied a magazine into a young man in the driver's seat of a car. And into that quiet vacuum, that vacuum where a courtroom obligation used to be, homicide detectives started walking, badge first, into rooms full of people who know Chrisean Rock personally. Not Ronny's other friends. Not Ronny's neighborhood. Not Ronny's alleged street rivals. Chrisean Rock's people. That vacuum is doing all the talking now. That vacuum is louder than any interview Chrisean Rock will ever give. That vacuum is what the state of Maryland is currently reading like a book. Now let me pull back, because I do not throw the word murder around casually, and I do not accuse a woman of a killing based on vibes. Everything I am telling you right now is what is on the public record, what has been said on other people's podcasts, and what has been screamed into cameras by people close to this story. This is alleged. Say it with me. Alleged. 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 But watch what happens next, because the word alleged is about to get very heavy. I am not writing an indictment. I am reading a timeline. And a timeline, unlike an accusation, does not need a lawyer to hold it up. A timeline holds itself up. And this timeline is standing on its own 2 feet asking questions nobody in Chrisean Rock's camp has answered yet. Act 3, the sister on Jason Lee's couch. The first person to blow the door off this thing was not a cop. It was not a journalist. It was not a rival. It was not an enemy. It was not a hater. It was not somebody with a grudge. It was Chrisean Rock's own biological sister. Her actual blood. Same last name. Same mother. Same DNA on both sides. And that sister sat down on Jason Lee's podcast, a podcast with reach, a podcast with cameras, a podcast that gets clipped and reposted and screenshotted 1,000 times before the ink dries on the upload, and on video, on camera, in high definition. She said the words that lit the entire fuse. When the host asked her, plain and direct, "What happened to Ronny?" she said, and I want you to hear this carefully, word for word, cadence for cadence, she said she could not speak on it. Because if she spoke on it, it would not look good for certain people that we know. Certain people that we know. Sit with that phrase. Do not skim it. Do not scroll past it. Sit with it. Roll it around your mouth like you're tasting it. Because that is not a phrase you use about a stranger. That is not a phrase you use about a random street beef. That is not a phrase you use about a shooter who was passing through Baltimore that night looking for a random target. That is a phrase you use when your sibling is standing behind a curtain you refuse to pull open. That is a phrase you use when you are protecting someone and hating that you have to protect them at the same time. That is a phrase you use when the truth is sitting on your tongue and your family loyalty is the only thing keeping your teeth clenched. Certain people that we know. Not certain people. Certain people that we know. The word we is doing the whole job in that sentence. The word we is the giveaway. Because we means her family. We means her bloodline. We means the people in her phone, the people at her Thanksgiving table, the people whose last name is her last name. When a sister says certain people that we know on a national podcast in the middle of a homicide investigation, the sister is telling you, in the loudest quiet voice she can produce, that the answer to the question is inside her own household. And she did not stop there. That was not the whole quote. That was the appetizer. She said Ronny ran up on Chrisean Rock in public. She said he had a paternity test coming up. She said it was all online. And then, with a tone I have not heard from a family member on a podcast in a long time, a tone that landed somewhere between weary and disgusted, somewhere between grief and testimony, she said, and then pow, pow, pow. Pow, pow, pow. Not, he got shot. Not, somebody killed him. Not, there was a tragedy. Pow, pow, pow. A sound effect. An onomatopoeia. A verbal recreation of the shooting itself, delivered by the biological sister of the woman at the center of the case, on a podcast with a professional camera pointed at her face. She said Ronny was her friend. She said she fed that boy. Fed him. In her own kitchen. She said they had a real relationship, she and Ronny, at some point, had also been close, in a way she did not fully specify, but did not fully hide, that it was passionate but not cloudy, and that even after she cut it off there was still love in the room. She spoke about Ronny like she was speaking about somebody she genuinely cared about. Not with distance. Not with contempt. With the specific, aching gentleness a person uses when they are describing somebody they wish were still on this earth. And then, in the same breath, on the same microphone, in front of the same camera, she implied, allegedly, do not make me repeat the word, that the woman who shares her last name is the reason Ronny is in a casket. Pow, pow, pow. On a public podcast. About her sister's ex. 1 week before a paternity test. If you are still on the fence about whether this story has weight, listen to that clip and come back. Listen to it with headphones. Listen to it slowed down. Listen to it in the original speed. Because a sister does not fly out on her own blood on national video unless something is boiling under her skin she cannot swallow anymore. Sisters protect sisters. Sisters lie for sisters. Sisters take secrets to the grave for sisters. That is how the sibling contract works in 9 out of 10 families in this country. You do not have to like it. You do not have to agree with it. But you know it is true. When the police come to a family's door and ask about the youngest daughter, the older sister rolls up the driveway with a shovel in her trunk, ready to bury whatever needs burying. That is the sibling contract. What sisters do not do, in 9 out of 10 households in America, is sit on a podcast with a professional camera pointed at them and hint that their own flesh and blood may have arranged a homicide. That took something to do. That took a level of anger or grief or moral clarity or fear that the average sibling never reaches. Whatever it was, Chrisean Rock's sister reached it, and the internet has been unable to unhear the sound. Which raises the question, why? Why did she do it? Why now? Why on Jason Lee? Why in that tone? What made a biological sister decide that the sibling contract had expired? There are a few theories, and I want to walk through them, because none of them are flattering to the woman at the top of this story. Theory 1: grief. The sister genuinely loved Ronny. She said as much. She used the word love. She used the word fed. She used the language of a woman who is in mourning. Grief can override a sibling contract. Grief can rip the muzzle off a person's mouth. Grief can put words in the air that a lifetime of family loyalty could not have suppressed. If the sister is speaking from grief, then she is speaking because the pain of what happened to Ronny is louder than her loyalty to Chrisean. That, on its own, tells you the size of what she believes happened. Theory 2: moral clarity. The sister has looked at the evidence, the paternity test on the calendar, the confrontation in the parking lot, the 10 shots, the 10 minutes, and has arrived at a conclusion about what likely occurred. And having arrived at that conclusion, she has decided she cannot, in good conscience, sit next to her sister at holidays pretending everything is fine while a young man's mother in Baltimore cries herself to sleep every night. Moral clarity, when it hits, is a bulldozer. Moral clarity does not negotiate. Moral clarity does not accept, but she's family. Moral clarity says the truth out loud on a podcast and lets the chips land where they land. Theory 3. Fear. Fear that she herself will be pulled into the vortex if she stays silent. Fear that the investigation will reach her doorstep next. Fear that being the last person in the family to say something makes her look like a co-conspirator. Fear that if she does not put daylight between herself and her sister on the record, in public, in a way that cannot be misinterpreted, she will end up on somebody's witness list under different terms. Fear is a rational motivator. Fear moves people to podcasts. Fear moves people to microphones. Any one of those theories on its own is a heavy sentence to swallow. All three of them together, grief, moral clarity, and fear, stacked on top of each other, is a psychological weight most people never have to carry. Whatever Chrisean Rock's sister is carrying right now, she is carrying it in public, and the culture is watching her carry it. And Chrisean Rock, so far, has not answered her sister. Not directly. Not in the terms the sister used. She has not gone on camera and said, "My sister is lying." She has not gone on camera and said, "Certain people that we know does not mean me." She has not addressed the specific quotes. She has, instead, done what she does best. She has kept moving. She has kept posting. She has kept live streaming. She has kept the brand alive. And in the specific silence where a rebuttal to her own sister should be, there is nothing but the hum of the algorithm. That silence is louder than the sister's quotes. That silence is the second fingerprint on the glass. Act 4, his trolling put him in a grave. Now the natural next question is, well, what did Chrisean Rock actually say when she got asked about Ronny's death? Because a woman at the center of a homicide investigation, whose own sister is on a podcast doing sound effects of the shooting, is going to get asked. There is no world in which she does not get asked. The only question is what she says when the microphone lands in her face. Here is what she said. Chrisean Rock did an interview. Chrisean Rock, when asked about Ronny's death, initially blurted out that his trolling put him in a grave. His trolling put him in a grave. Read that again. Read it out loud if you have to. His trolling put him in a grave. That is a sentence a woman said, on camera, about a young man who was executed with 10 rounds in the driver's seat of his own car outside his own house one week before a paternity test. Chrisean Rock realized what she said mid-sentence. You can see it happen in the footage. There is a flicker in her eyes. A pause. A tiny hitch in the rhythm of her speech. The "oh God, I just said that out loud" moment that every person who has ever spoken publicly recognizes on sight. And then she pivoted, mid-breath, to a story about how Ronny must have had street beef. Street beef. Some nebulous, unnamed, unspecified conflict in Baltimore with unnamed enemies over unspecified issues. Street beef. Let me ask you something. Ronny was not a street guy the internet had ever heard about. Ronny was not a rapper. Ronny was not a dealer with a public profile. Ronny was not a name that showed up in Baltimore beef songs. Ronny was not a target of any diss track. Ronny was not somebody with a documented feud with anybody except the woman he had a paternity case against. If Ronny had street beef so severe that it got him executed by a professional quality ambush on his own block, that street beef would have been known. Somebody would have heard about it. Somebody would have leaked it. Somebody somewhere would have said, yeah, Ronny had problems with so-and-so. Nobody has said that. Not one person. In months. The street beef theory has 0 supporting witnesses, 0 corroborating rumors, 0 named alleged rivals, and 0 public traces. It is a theory that exists in exactly one place, the mouth of Chrisean Rock in the interview where she was walking back a sentence she wished she had not said. The only person Ronny was publicly trolling on the internet was Chrisean Rock. That is the record. That is the public archive. If you go on Ronny's social media right now, what is left of it, you will find posts about the paternity case, posts about his son, posts responding to Chrisean, posts responding to Blueface. You will not find posts trolling Baltimore. You will not find posts calling out street figures. You will not find posts starting fights with strangers. His trolling, if we're calling it that, was targeted, specific, and singular. It had one recipient. So when Chrisean Rock says out loud that Ronny trolled himself into a grave, the only thing that sentence can honestly mean, when translated through the actual evidence of what Ronny's public activity looked like, is that trolling her was the offense he paid for. That is not a confession. Say it with me. That is not a confession. But it is the closest thing to one you will get out of a woman with a public relations manager. That sentence is going to be replayed in slow motion in every documentary that gets made about this case for the next 20 years. That sentence is a bookmark in the file. That sentence is going to be printed on a slide in a prosecutor's PowerPoint someday. That sentence, more than any other single artifact in this entire timeline, is the thing that makes me sit up straight when I hear it. Because people who are truly grieved by a death, even a death that was inconvenient, do not describe the victim's behavior as the cause of the murder. People who are truly innocent of any involvement in a death do not editorialize about why the deceased deserved to be shot. Innocent parties, when asked about a shocking death, say the socially acceptable things. They say, it's a tragedy. They say, my prayers go out to his family. They say, I hope justice is served. Those are the reflex sentences. Those are the sentences a public figure's media training drills into her. Chrisean Rock did not say those sentences. Chrisean Rock said his trolling put him in a grave. That is a slip. That is what a slip sounds like. That is the mask coming off for half a second and then getting slammed back on. That is the reason interrogators love pauses in conversations, because the human brain, when caught between the truth and the cover story, will occasionally cough up a fragment of the truth on its way to constructing the cover story. Chrisean Rock coughed. On camera. In an interview. And the internet clipped it, uploaded it, and preserved it forever. And Chrisean Rock did not stop there. That was not the only revealing moment in the interview. When pressed further about Ronny, she talked about him with a coldness that did not fit a man she had once been intimate with. She talked about him like he was a mosquito she had swatted. She said if he had lived, if he had really been a father option, his family was good, his mother was good, his grandmother was good, and honestly she would have preferred him over Blueface. But then, in the same breath, she said Ronny only claimed the baby because he was tripping. He was tripping. That is how Chrisean Rock described a dead man who spent his last months in a courtroom trying to reach a child he believed was his. He was tripping. Cold does not begin to cover that. Cold is not the word. Cold is the word you use when somebody forgets to text you back. Cold is not the word you use for a woman describing the man who was killed 1 week before a court date she desperately did not want to attend. There is a way you talk about a person you had a child with, even if that child turns out not to be yours, even if the relationship burned to the ground, even if there is not a shred of love left in the memory. There is a floor of humanity human beings observe. You do not step on the grave. You do not editorialize the corpse. You do not describe the deceased as tripping for having claimed a child he believed was his. You just don't. There is a version of Chrisean Rock, in a healthier universe, who could have said, look, I don't think the baby was his, but he loved that child from a distance, and I am devastated for his family, and I hope whoever did this is caught. That is the sentence a normal person says. That is the sentence a person with nothing to hide says. That is the sentence an innocent person says even if they are also frustrated, and even if the relationship was messy. Chrisean Rock did not observe that floor. Chrisean Rock walked past the floor and kept going into the basement. And the basement is where the case gets built. Because prosecutors watch these interviews. Detectives watch these interviews. Grand jurors, when they are eventually seated, get shown these interviews. And when the moment comes for 12 strangers to look at Chrisean Rock and decide whether she had the emotional distance from Ronny's death that a truly uninvolved party would have had, that interview is going to be Exhibit 1 in the answer to that question. That interview is going to be the piece of tape the prosecution rewinds and rewinds and rewinds. That interview is going to be the moment a juror in the third row of the jury box lets out a small, involuntary shudder and writes something down. His trolling put him in a grave. He was tripping. Those two sentences together in the same interview about the same dead man, 1 week after a paternity test that never happened, are the psychological baseline of this entire case. That is where a prosecutor starts. That is where a defense attorney starts sweating. That is where the story of Chrisean Rock's on-camera relationship to Ronny's death permanently, irreversibly, catastrophically, turns against her.